Good evening. Tonight's service is a slightly different take on the usual Tenebrae service or Stations of the Cross to which you might be accustomed for Good Friday. It combines the 7 last words of Christ from the cross along with first-person testimonials, if you will, of some of the people that he encountered during his ministry. The hope is this might give you a different avenue into reflecting on your own relationship with Jesus Christ and also your understanding of his life and ministry and death and resurrection during this Easter season. If you'll note in the bulletin, we will be singing various verses of hymns interspersed with the readings, so please join us when that happens. The service will end in silence with all of us up here at the front. Once we exit, please feel free to stay as long as you would like.
When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing."
I will never forget the day that I met Jesus. You see, I had become involved with a married man. At the very time we were together, an angry mob burst into my home and dragged me out into the street. "Adulterer," they screamed. They would not let me go. They carried me towards the walls of the city. I knew what they were planning for me. Many of them picked up rocks that fit right in their hand as we walked along, which they were going to use to stone me to death. This was their answer for my sin: complete condemnation. We were well on our journey toward my death when I overheard a conversation. There was something about a teacher, something about a trick, and something about a chance to catch him in his words. This idea seemed to please the group very much. The mob suddenly changed direction and took me to the temple courts. When they found the man they were looking for, they stopped and flung me in front of him. I will never forget what they said. "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say?" They waited to see if he would join them in stoning me for my sin. I felt every condemning eye burning a hole through me. I knew that if he agreed to condemn me, this was it. This would be the final straw. His answer would bring the first stone. He bent down and wrote on the ground with his finger. The angry mob questioned him relentlessly, wanting to know his answer. He finally stood up and gave his answer. If any one of you is without sin, be the first one to throw a rock at her. Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. There was a long silence, and then I heard a sound. It was the sound of a shower of rocks. I looked up in fear, thinking that the moment of my death was at hand, but these rocks were not being thrown at me. They were being dropped to the street from the hands of the men that realized that condemnation was not God's solution for my sin. One by one, beginning with the oldest, they walked away and left me with Jesus. He stood and said to me, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," I said. "Then neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin." His solution for my sin was not to stone me, not to condemn me, but to forgive me. He called me to leave my life of sin, and I did. His grace was the beginning of a new life for me. Now, upon this cross, he offers this forgiveness to all. He has done no wrong. The Romans and his own people have condemned him to die. He has every reason to condemn us, but he hasn't. Did you hear him? He prays to God that we might be forgiven for what we have done to him. His way is not to condemn, but to forgive. So few have heard him. So few seem to trust him. But every sinner who believes him will receive what I received that day: forgiveness to leave the sins of my past behind, forgiveness to start a new life.
Two robbers were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us!" But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "I tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise."
I saw Jesus carry the heavy weight of his cross to that terrible place. As I followed him, I also carried a heavy burden, the burden of failure and shame. I am Joseph of Arimathea. I have known Jesus for quite a while. I have heard the truth of God in his words. I have seen the power of God in his deeds. I have seen the purpose of God in his life. I believed long ago that Jesus is our Messiah, the deliverer of our people, our hope for the future. But I've kept my faith a secret. I've done nothing to help him. Oh, I've had my chances. Even last night at that mock trial before the council, I could have stood up for him. I could have defended him. I might have changed their minds and spared Jesus' life. But I said nothing because I was afraid. I was afraid of being rejected by members of the council, of losing my place of power in this community, or maybe losing my own life. I've tried to follow him secretly, but now, as he hangs upon this cross, I see that following him secretly is not following him at all. He hangs between. I was ready to walk away, a complete failure, until I heard his words a moment ago. He hangs between two thieves, men who have sinned again and again by stealing. One thief had the audacity to taunt Jesus along with this cruel crowd, but the other thief asked Jesus to remember him when he came into his kingdom. I heard that and I thought, you miserable wretch, it's too late for you, just like it's too late for me. Your life is over. Your life is finished. But Jesus did not see him that way. Did you hear what the Master said? Today you will be with me in paradise. Could it be that no matter how many yesterdays this thief has wasted, he can still enter the kingdom of heaven? He has received the promise of paradise because he seized today and trusted in Jesus. The Master has said that it is not too late for this thief. Maybe it's not too late for me. I could have helped him 100 times, but I have hidden my faith in fear. But maybe even now there is something loving I can do for him, some deed in which I show my faith in him, my love for him, and my devotion to him. Like this thief, I have wasted so many yesterdays, but what is true for this thief must be true for me also. What matters most is today. I can be faithful today, I can stand by him today, and I can receive the promise of paradise today.
Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the tree? When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Dear woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home.
Oh,
can I give up my son? How can I watch him die? Long ago, Joseph was taken from me in death, and now my son, my baby, Jesus he's dying like this? To me, he has always belonged to me. I carried him. I gave birth to him. Joseph and I raised him in our home. He worked at the carpenter's shop. But I knew he never really belonged to us. From the very start, he has belonged to God. I remember when Jesus was 8 days old. We took him to the temple to dedicate him to the Lord as the law commands. And this old man named Simeon was there. He told us that Jesus would bring salvation to his people, even the Gentiles. Oh, what a marvel that was. But Simeon said something else. He said, this child is destined to cause the falling and the rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed. He said, a sword will pierce your own soul too. And those words have come true today. My son, my baby, Jesus, spoken against by the religious leaders, by the spiritual leaders, by the political leaders. These last hours have shown how much fear and hatred live in the hearts of those who claim to lead the people of God. Their hearts have been revealed. And a sword has pierced my soul today. My son, suffering to die on that cross.
Mary, did you hear what he just said? He called us to be family to each other. Do you remember that day when you and your sons came to take Jesus home, away from the crowds and the conflict and the people who claimed that he was crazy? Do you remember the question he asked? Who is my mother and who are my brothers? Then he pointed to his disciples and said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. I wasn't so sure what he meant by those words when he spoke them, but I believe that I understand them now. There is a love which is stronger than the love of a human family, a love which is even stronger than a love a mother has for a child or a child has for his mother. One day, when he was teaching us, he described the greatest kind of love. He said, greater love has no one than this. He laid down his life for his friends. Mary, we are seeing that love today. He's laying down his life for us. And because he loves us so much, he wants us to love each other. Mary, he has called us to be family to each other. He wants you to be like a mother to me, and he wants me to be like your son. We will do what he has told us to do. We will be his people. We will love each other. We will be faithful to everyone who does the will of God. Come, Mary, and share my home. His love has made us a family, the family of God.
And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?
I came to Jerusalem for Passover. I was minding my own business when I heard the noise of a crowd in the street. I pushed through the crowd to see what was happening and saw a most horrible sight. The Romans were leading this poor man through the streets, mocking him as they went, making him a public example for anyone who lost the favor of Rome. They were leading him out of the city to crucify him, but they had almost killed him already. His back was bleeding and torn open, the work of the cruel Roman whip, I was sure. He staggered and stumbled underneath the weight of the heavy cross he bore. He fell, but the guards struck him and yelled at him to get up and go on. But he couldn't go far. He fell again, and this time even they knew that he wouldn't bear the burden of the cross alone. The guards looked around for someone to help him. I waited to see if a friend of his would step forward to help him, but no one did. A guard, in great frustration, picked me out of the crowd and ordered me to pick up the man's cross and carry it for him to the place of execution. I had no choice but to obey. Still, I resented having to carry a cross for anyone. It was heavy and dirty and bloody. I thought to myself that I must have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. As I followed behind this man, Jesus, I realized that though I had taken a heavy load from his shoulders, he still bore a heavy load which no one could take away. I have never seen a man so all alone. I have heard this man once had a large following. Thousands came to hear him speak and to see the great things he did for God. Large crowds wanted to make him their king, but where did they go? Not one of them was there to help him bear his cross. I know that he had a circle of disciples who had traveled with him and learned from him for a long time. They were closer to him than anyone, but they too were gone now. His mother and some other women followed us through the streets, but not one of his disciples was there to help him bear his load. As I, a total stranger, followed him outside the city and laid down the cross upon which he would be killed, I thought that this man was alone, as a man had ever been. Somehow, I couldn't leave him. I had to stay. I had to stand by him, at least at a distance. No one should die so all alone. As I stood near his cross, I asked one of our religious leaders, one of the members of the Sanhedrin, what the man's crime had been. What had he done to deserve such a death? The man answered that this Jesus had made a blasphemous claim that he and the Father are one. As I thought about what Jesus had claimed and whether I could believe it was true, I heard him cry out in agony, which ran deeper than the nails which held him to the cross. He said, my God, why have you forsaken me? How awful, I thought. At one time, he felt that he was one with God, and now he feels so alone that even God has turned away from him. What could have come between them? I don't know, but I will never forget how he looked and how he sounded. He's carrying much more than a cross today. He looks like a man who is carrying the whole world.
Were you there when they pierced him in the sky? Were you there when they pierced him in the side? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they pierced him in the side? Later, knowing that all was now completed, and so that the scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, I am thirsty. A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips.
This man is so thirsty. He's lost a great deal of blood. He's been driven through the streets like an animal. He's hung on that cross for hours. At least these Romans have the decency to give him a moment of relief from his thirst. That is what he did for me. I met Jesus when I was very thirsty. I had come to the well to draw water in the middle of the day. I know that noon is not the easiest time to go to the well. The sun is hot and the work is hard, but I would rather face the scorching sun than the burning eyes and blistering words of the people of my town. I went to the well in the heat of the day because I didn't have to face anyone. That is, until I met him. I was shocked to see a Jewish man in our village. You see, Samaritans and Jews have been bitter enemies for longer than anyone can remember. I tried to pretend that he was not there, for I feared that he, above all people, would treat me like dirt. But he did not ignore me. He asked me for a drink of water. I was shocked. I answered, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" He answered my question not by telling me why he wanted to reject me, but by telling me what he wanted to give me. He said, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." I didn't understand. I thought that he was talking about some other source of water for drinking. But I didn't see how that could be. He didn't have a water jar. He didn't have a well of his own. What could he offer me, I wondered. He told me that whoever drinks the water he gives will never thirst. The water he gives, he said, is a spring of water, an endless supply, which brings eternal life. I did not fully understand what he was saying, but I knew that I was thirsty for more than water that day. I asked him to give me his living water that I might not thirst again. He then told me about my life. He saw my struggle. He knew my sin. He'd read what was written upon my heart. But he did not reject me. He did not condemn me. He invited me to know God personally, to worship him in spirit and in truth. He saw that I thirsted for much more than water. I was thirsty for acceptance. I was thirsty for forgiveness. I was thirsty for peace with God. I dared not ask him what I was wondering. Could this be the Messiah, our deliverer, our Savior? So I hinted. I know that Messiah is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. He answered, I who speak to you am he. In that moment, my thirst was quenched. He gave me the living water. And as he said, I have never thirsted again. Oh, Jesus, I know how it feels to be thirsty, and I pray that soon your suffering will end, your thirst will be quenched, and you will again know the peace which you have given to me.
When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
It is finished. He hangs near death. I am sorry to see one of our own people die in such agony and disgrace, but it had to be. Some time ago, reports came from Bethany that this Jesus had raised a man, Lazarus, from the dead. People were wild. Word had spread to Jerusalem and throughout the whole town. The crowds were ready to follow him, to make him their king. Their hopes were high. They spoke of Messiah. But the crowds, ignorant and uneducated as they are, they had no idea what danger this man was bringing upon us. We have an arrangement with the Romans to practice our faith. Word of so large a following might reach them, and we could lose our temple, our right to lead the people as their priests. Did he not see the danger that he put the very faith of Israel at risk? He had to die before he brought trouble upon us all. I know he did things that some people will call good. But after all, he was guilty of terrible crimes. He stirred the waters of rebellion. He taught without proper authority, without training, without our permission. And I heard him with my own ears when he claimed to be Messiah, the God-sent deliverer of our people. This is blasphemy. For this a man must die. It is finished. Our problem is solved. The threat has been eliminated. He said it himself. And yet I wonder. He's near death, but his presence in this place is stronger than ever. He haunts me. I know a man on a cross can hold no danger for the high priest of the people of Israel. But yet, I feel somehow this is not over. As I stand here beneath his cross, a strange and trembling thought crosses my mind. What if he was right? Certainly the Sanhedrin, the spiritual leaders of the people of Israel, could not be wrong in so important a matter. We had to protect the temple. We had to protect our positions, the priesthood, the faith of the people of Israel. But my heart is still troubled by this man, this Jesus of Nazareth. What if it was true? Could it be that God sent his Messiah to us and we have put him to death? I heard him say, "It is finished." But I fear I will never be finished with this man. I will always wonder who he really is.
Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry and saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God."
Many times I have stood at the foot of a cross and watched men die. I have seen the desperate things men do to escape so cruel a death. I have heard them curse me and the emperor that I serve for putting them to death. I have even heard them curse God for forsaking them. I have seen so many men die that in my heart is calloused. I don't feel much of anything anymore. That is, until today. Not everyone who has stood beneath the cross has seen what I have seen today. Some, like the priests and the Pharisees, have seen an enemy eliminated. Others have seen the tragic end of a very promising life. But as I stood beneath this cross today, I saw so much more. I saw a man ask God to forgive the very men who were putting him to death. I saw him reach out in saving love to a dying thief and give him the promise of paradise. I saw this man, Jesus, care for the needs of his sorrowing mother in this hour of great need. I heard his agony of spirit as, for the first time, I believe, he felt separated from the God he loved. I saw just how human he was as he confessed his thirst. And I heard him declare that his life, his work, his mission is finished. As I stood beneath this cross, as I saw how Jesus lived and died, I have seen the very Son of God. Oh, Jesus, you have committed your Spirit into your Father's hands. Right here, right now, I commit my life and my destiny into your hands. Forgive me for my part in putting you to death. Despite all that I have done, give me today the promise of paradise. Make me your brother, a member of God's great family. End my agony of separation from God. Quench the parching thirst of my soul. Do your saving work in me until it is finished. Here, beneath this cross, I have seen the saving love of the Son of God. Tell me, friend, as you stand beneath this cross, what do you see?
Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Sometimes it causes me to tremble.